Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to the living room. My name is Dr. Ethel James, and most people simply know me as Dr. J. So let me welcome back those of you who are returning to the living room. I want to say thank you for coming back. Thank you for your messages, for your comments. Thank you for allowing me to know that perhaps this house was needed more than I actually realized. So thank you for that. And also, if today is your very first visit, I am especially glad that you are here. And I say thank you to you as well. So, just to bring you up to speed, last week we opened the front door together. We talked about why this is more than just a YouTube channel. We talked about the living room being where leadership, faith, identity, legacy, emotional intelligence, and spiritual intelligence and becoming are all welcomed in the same conversation. We talked about belonging, we talked about the invitation, and we also talked about that one simple truth, and that is you belong here. Because the truth of the matter is this before we talk about any of those important things that I mentioned to you previously, I really believe that we need to know that we are welcomed in a particular space. And that is where we began our journey last week. But today, if you are live or if you are watching the recording, I'm going to say type in the comment section today. Today, I want to tell you why the house had to be built in the first place. Because the truth is, I didn't build this house because I wanted a platform. I didn't build the house because I wanted a brand. I didn't even build the house because I wanted more things to manage, and Lord knows I have a plenty. I didn't even want to have to write more content to create or even rooms to maintain. I built the house because fragmentation had become too expensive. Not financially, though, there was some of that, right? Not professionally, though, that there was some of that too, or mentally, or emotionally, spiritually, or personally. I will tell you, there comes a moment in life where you become tired of introducing yourself in pieces. You know what I'm talking about. You can put a comment in the comment section. And some of you actually know exactly what I mean. You literally become fluent in translation, right? And what I mean by that is that this room gets this version of me. This audience gets this version of me. And this environment gets this language. And this room gets my leadership. And that room gets my faith. And this room gets my strategy and my intelligence and my intellect, my compassion. And this room gets my heart. And this room gets my credentials. And this room gets my calling. And eventually you begin asking a question that sounds almost ridiculous when you say it out loud. And I'm certain, I am so certain that many of you ask the same question that I'm about to ask. Where does all of me go? Not part of me, but all of me. Because every single time I give people, I gave people answers about who I was. All of it was true. They would ask, am I an executive trainer? Yes. Am I an author? Yes. Am I a public speaker, motivational speaker, a keynote speaker? Yes. Am I a conference host? Yes. Am I a mentor? Yes. Am I a woman of faith? And I will tell you 10 toes down, absolutely unequivocally, without any hesitation. Yes. Am I a leadership strategist? Am I the fearless voice architect for women? Absolutely, yes. Am I a builder? Yes. Am I an educator? Yes. Am I an emotionally intelligent woman? Yes. Am I spiritually intelligent? Yes. Every single answer was true. But none of them felt complete because every single time I introduced one part of myself, another part stood quietly behind me, waiting to be acknowledged. And eventually, if you know, like I know, I realized something. I realized that I wasn't exhausted because I was doing too much. I was exhausted because I was crossing too many borders. every single room required translation. Every single room required editing. Every room deciding what version of me belongs here. And I think many gifted people, y'all, I think y'all understand that exhaustion, especially women, especially leaders, especially believers, especially people carrying multiple assignments, especially people who have been told their whole lives that you need to narrow down, you need to pick one thing, you need to stay in your lane, and you know, the truth of the matter is maybe you do need a lane, but I will tell you that on one of the most important days of my life, at some point where we had guests that were present, one of the things that they would say or said to me at that time was, you know, now that this has happened, maybe you can go somewhere and sit down. And I will tell you, I resented that person or those individuals for saying that. It wasn't because I don't think they meant it, you know, facetiously, but how long have they been having those thoughts about me? And so when if you hear it enough, sometimes you start believing what people are saying to you. Maybe you do need to go somewhere and have a seat. Maybe you do need to get in your own lane. But then I began to realize something. What if my lane is not for me to become smaller? Perhaps they didn't have the eyes to see the same way God sees. Perhaps they weren't there when He made me. Perhaps they weren't there when He formed me. But what if it's your lane? What if the issue isn't that you're too much? I just want you to think about that because, you know, from time to time, you start thinking about that thing. What if it is that you're not too much? What if the issue is that you've been trying to fit a God-sized assignment into people-sized categories and expectations? Did you hear me what I said? What if you have been trying to downsize a God-sized assignment and fit it into people-sized categories and expectations? I'm going to tell you, when you ask yourself that question, it'll change your life because it changed mine. Because somewhere along the way, I realized something that I hope frees somebody today, somebody that's listening, whether you're listening live or you're listening to the playback or the recording or whatever they call it. I'm going to tell you, God never asked me or you to become less. He asked me to become aligned, and that's what He's asking you because those are not the same thing. Reduction and alignment are not the same thing. Shrinking and stewardship are definitely not the same thing. Elimination and order, they're not the same thing. And for years, I was asking the wrong question. I kept asking, what do I eliminate? What do I need to cut? What do I need to stop doing? What part of me needs to disappear so the rest of me can make sense? I want you to think about those questions because whether you ask those same exact questions or if you ask a question similar or akin to what I just said, the truth of the matter is that question will help you to change the questions that you are asking, right? The question changed, not what do I eliminate? It needs to change to how do I steward what I've been given? This is a completely different question. And one comes from fear, the other comes from responsibility, one comes from scarcity, the other one comes from stewardship. One asks, which part of me has to die? The other asks, how do I carry what heaven entrusted to me well? That question, it built this house. Not YouTube, not podcasts, not websites, and definitely not conferences. That question of how do I align every move, every conversation, every opportunity, assignment, platform, dollar, every relationship, every single solitary room with my God given purpose so that I no longer feel fragmented mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially? That question built this house because I am a blood bought, born again believer. And one of the deepest questions that I used to wrestle with, it was, you know, will people understand me And I know a lot of people, even today, even in the things that I do with the corporate training, the higher ed training, all of those things, all of the people, all 35,000 plus of them, at some point was asking the question, will people understand me? And when we stop asking that question, when we take a moment and consider who we've been formed, made, and created to be, we start asking a different question. And that different question is, will God be pleased with how I carry what he entrusted to me? This is an extremely different and powerful question that required introspection, it required retrospection, and it required some reflection. Because the truth of this matter is that I never wanted to become mixture. I never wanted to become compromised. I never wanted to become performers, because we have a lot of performers every single day that show up in the workplace. They show up in corporate America, in government. They show up in the church and ministry. I never wanted to become one person in one room and another person in another room. And yet I looked around and I realized that many systems seem to require exactly that. And you might say, well, what do you mean by that, Dr. J? Hmm. Just think about it. There's so many people in the workplace now. We don't even know if you believe in Jesus Christ or Buddha or anybody else for that matter. But the fact of the matter is this: we ask people to show up, and then we try to change them to fit in our definition of who you think that they are or should be. We ask people, bring leadership here, but leave your faith outside. Bring your strategy here, but leave discernment outside. Bring your intellect here, but leave your spirituality outside. Bring professionalism here, leave your conviction outside. And remember, I remember wrestling deeply with that because I kept returning to Apostle Paul. And he said, he became all things to all people that he might win some. And no, my name is not Apostle Paul, but it is Dr. J. And I understood that he adapted his language, he adapted his approach, he adapted his example, but he never, not one time, abandoned his identity. And when you begin to realize that and begin to accept that you'll understand that adaptation is not compromise and wisdom is certainly not mixture. You will also know that meeting people where they are is not abandoning who you are. And that realization, it changed everything for me because I discovered I didn't have to choose between leadership and faith. I didn't have to choose between emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence, because that's where people are torn. I didn't have to choose between marketplace and ministry. I didn't have to choose between strategy and compassion. And I did not have to choose between evidence and identity. And I certainly did not have to choose between my calling and my career. Why? Because God had never separated those things to begin with. It was people who separated it, systems that separated it, categories that separated it, but heaven did not ask me to separate it. And that realization, when I think about it, it became one of the governing philosophies of my life, that I do not separate emotional intelligence from spiritual intelligence. Because for a long time, people have spoken about emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence as though they actually operate separate conversations. And I don't believe that they do. I believe that they are meant to work together, informing one another and producing a wiser, more complete way of leading. And over time, I'm going to tell you, you will hear me refer to that integration as unified intelligence, because whole people require an integrated way of thinking, an integrated way of discerning, of relating and leading. And we're definitely will spend more time, exploring that in the future conversations. But for today, I just simply wanted you to understand one of the foundational beliefs upon which this house was built. And for those of you who say, well, Dr. J, you know what, I need a working definition of emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence. And I'm going to encourage you, if you don't have one, get your notebook, get your journal out, because I'm going to explain. And we, as I mentioned to you before, or will mention over some time, is that it was emotional intelligence has been, as far as identification, has been around for over 2,000 years, a long, long time. Let me say that. But it wasn't until 1995 with Daniel Goleman, where he wrote his book, Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than, oh, good gracious, I don't have the full title, but how emotional intelligence, how it can matter more than, um, oh, I'll look it up and I'll bring it back to you. But I do want to give you a, um, a working definition. And that is that emotional intelligence, when we're defining it, and I have a little bit of, something that Danny Goleman didn't put in his definition, but I'm going to say it is our God given capacity to be able to recognize, to understand, to steward, and appropriately respond to emotions, our own and those of others. And he breaks it down into four specific categories: self awareness, self regulation, self social regulation, and of course relationships. But ultimately, it is helping us to understand our own triggers, be able to effectively respond and help others manage their emotions also, but to do so in a way that preserves their dignity, and it strengthens relationships. Emotional intelligence. You can kind of record it back. Okay. I think I have the full title. I'm thinking Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than Your IQ. I was like, what? IQ, EQ, AQ. Got quite a lot of those. But the part that I want you to get is the spiritual intelligence. And spiritual intelligence is also our God-given capacity to perceive, to discern, to interpret and respond to spiritual realities, divine wisdom, conviction, timing, and purpose through alignment with God and leadership of the Holy Spirit. You can rewind it back, but I'll tell you again. Spiritual intelligence is our God given capacity to perceive, discern, interpret, and respond to spiritual realities, divine wisdom, conviction, timing, and purpose through alignment with God and the leadership of the Holy Spirit. In other words, one helps us to understand people, the other helps us to understand purpose. One helps us to navigate relationships, and the other helps us to navigate calling. One helps us to recognize what is happening, and the other helps us discern why it is happening. And I believe firmly that leadership requires both, because people are not divided beings. We think, we feel, we believe, we discern, we hope, we grieve, we lead, right? We become. And any person that thinks that it's okay to just lead only one dimension of a person is to lead only a fraction of who they are. And in other words, to lead the mind while ignoring the heart, the spirit, or the story is to lead only a portion of the person standing in front of you. Here's what I believe. I believe that whole people require whole leadership. And I believe we are called to lead whole people, including ourselves. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why Legacy Rising with Dr. J exists. One house, one mission, many rooms. Told you about some of the rooms last week: the conference room, the marketplace room, the library, the mentoring room, the continuation room, the living room that we're sitting in. Okay. Different rooms, same house. And maybe that's the question I want to leave with you today. I want you to think about this. What part of yourself have you been apologizing for consistently over and over again? What gift have you been asking permission to keep? Mm, think about that. What room have you been leaving pieces of yourself outside of just for you to be able to gain entry? And what if God is not asking you to become less? What if he is asking you to build a house that's strong enough to steward everything that he entrusted to you? Hmm. Do me a favor and sit with that this week. Pray about it this week. Journal about it this week. Think about it this week. Because perhaps the answer isn't reduction. Perhaps the answer is alignment. Maybe it could even be a stewardship or even wholeness. Just take that in its entirety. And perhaps that's why you found your way here. Not because you needed another podcast, not because you needed another leadership channel, and not because you needed another voice competing for your attention, because I've already told you that Peter Drucker says time is our most scarcest resource. But perhaps you found your way here because somewhere inside of you, you've been asking questions that sound a lot like the questions that I've been asking. Where does all of me go? All of me, not pieces of me. How do I carry everything that I've been entrusted to carry without losing myself in the process? How do I remain faithful to who God created me to be while navigating systems? Hmm. Think about it this way. How do I remain true to who God created me to be while navigating systems that often reward fragmentation? How do I stop feeling like I have to choose between parts of myself that were never meant to compete? How do I, and point to yourself, how do I become whole? Maybe that's your question and maybe it isn't, but even if one part of today's conversation felt familiar, if one sentence made you feel seen and heard and valued and appreciated and recognized, because that's what we all want as human beings. If even one moment made you take a deep breath and then exhale and ask yourself the question and or even say to yourself, maybe I'm not the only one, then perhaps this conversation was always meant to find you. Because here's what I know. And I know this with all assurance that Legacy Rising was never built for perfect people. It was for people carrying something significant, people carrying vision and responsibility and questions, people carrying callings that don't fit neatly into man-made categories. People trying to steward well what heaven entrusted to them, people trying to become whole. And if that's you, let me say this to you. Welcome home. There is room for you here, and there will always be room for you here. So thank you for the gift of your time and the opportunity to serve you with excellence. Thank you for investing this time with me. Thank you for trusting me with your attention, and thank you for sitting with me in the living room. And next week, we're going to talk about a conversation that sits very close to my heart: faith, leadership, and the space between. Because I believe firmly that many people are living in that space, whether they have language for it or not. But until then, keep becoming, keep stewarding, keep building. And remember, the living room is always open. Come in, sit down, or in the words of my grandmother, sit down. Let's sit down. Let's talk. And I'll see you next Wednesday.